I really look up to the Dockmaster because he does cool shit and it's fun.
Also because I'm so large.
Oh, he's a wide boy.
Yeah. Well, he's funny in a way I could never be, which is to say clever. And he's popular, so it's like, yeah.
No, bro, stop sucking his dick.
I was about to make a joke, but I'm not gonna, because that would make it even worse.
Because it's going online. I'm not cutting it out.
Yeah. Good evening, children. I am Sir Johann Gasmask Esquire the Third, meat man of many universes. Today I am joined by
Lionel Johnson, the lover of meat.
The lover of meat. Alfonso Gal, your dashing robot husbando.
Salty's the Incorruptible, retired space marine for now.
Retired?
And we are joined by the ever lovely
Dockmaster, otherwise known as that asshole shipyard.
Yes, of SacredCowShopyards. Arguably the best sci-fi channel on YouTube. That is to say, general sci-fi. But anyway.
Is it weird to say that I listen to you guys in the shower? Because I do.
We could answer that.
Oh boy.
Oh. Okay. I just realized I forgot to put out an overview of what we're gonna do.
Oh, I'll be fine.
Anyway, today we'll be going over the Imperial Navy. Not my best topic in regards to 40k, but it's still rather interesting and very big, and it falls into that. And it falls into the ever popular trope of 40k, which is they do this sometimes. All right.
It's I'm on a boat but in space.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, it's I'm in a boat in what was that fucking dipshit English admiral that basically changed the entire navy?
A lot more specific than that.
Age of Sail.
I think that's happened a couple of times, hasn't it?
Yeah, Age of Sail, whatever. Anyway, it's you're on a sailboat, but it's in space, so you know.
I mean, they are powered. It's not like they're like using solar. I would love the idea.
You're on an ironclad steamer.
Hell, don't forget the hell part.
Oh yes, that is.
Yeah, and you're traipsing through Satan's front lawn.
Yeah.
I bypassed the Geller field.
My brother in Christ,
Gellerfield,
that is
what
the
Gellerfield?
Gellerfield chip, not the safety limiter. Says as he sprouts a tentacle out of his eyebrow.
Yes.
All right.
In terms of an outside perspective, because I think a lot of us here aren't very knowledgeable about the Imperial Navy.
Yeah.
What would be your elevator pitch? Like the short version of what the overview of them would be.
Cathedrals giving each other broadsides.
Pretty
I
much,
love
yeah.
that. Okay. That's a very good elevator pitch.
I guess technically cathedrals in space, but still, yeah.
Oh no!
I mean,
they have like the smaller, like what we would call like a cutter or something that they have. I forget the class name. It's basically just a cathedral spire with engines on it.
Because from what I understand, the scale of these ships is huge, right? It's insane.
Oh yeah, they're enormous.
Like
The
cities.
Emperor class is like
Hey,
miles
like-
and miles long.
Oh yeah, no.
Like-
a cruiser is like 5 clicks.
Like an internal space equivalent to the city of, like, New York.
Yeah.
They're effectively flying our colonies.
I
They need to be.
I'd compare it closer to Paris because of the catacombs.
Fair point.
Fair.
It's pretty mad.
So
And then you figure all of the infrastructure to support something that size is built
Mhm.
into that space as well.
That's
And
what I was
as
about to
many
say, is that they're
people as would
effectively
live
arcology.
there in an actual city are in that space as well. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
you have to
know
remember
how
these
these things
ships are so
qualify
large.
as ships. This is a
Oh, yeah.
settlement.
Oh, it is. Well, no, the flying continents are belong to the Eldar. But
Oh,
it
you mean
is
like orbital plates?
No, like actual like continent, if not planetoid-sized craft. Those belong to the Eldar.
Yeah, wouldn't that be what an orbital plate would be considered? That's a tangent. Never mind.
I don't know what a plate is. You'll have to excuse me. Anyway, as a general overview, the Imperial Navy is what you get when you cross like a Victorian or steampunk, well, not steampunk, like ironclad navy with feudalism. And it exists.
feudalism.
Yeah, it exists almost entirely to patrol and protect Imperial space, which is a daunting task, and they almost rarely succeed in doing so, just due to the sheer scale of the land or the area they're supposed to protect.
I mean, I feel like it can't be understated the fact that the Imperial Navy does their job and does it very well,
yeah.
apparently, because the Imperium is functioning. I mean, air quotes functioning.
Yeah, but
Functioning as well as something spanning that kind of distance
Oh,
could.
I mean,
it's
we've all played Battlefleet Gothic, right?
I have not,
no.
sadly.
Well, the Imperial
I've
Navy,
watched complete videos of it, but
Yeah.
they are a lot better at their jobs than people think they are.
I've read a lot of books. I know in the books that some of the fights that they're involved in, the ranges can be longer than the distance between us and the nearest planet.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Like, actual space combat depends entirely on the author, and I kind of fucking hate that.
Yeah.
Well, that's just like anything. Like sometimes you read somebody talking about Space Marines and like that is you're underselling it a little bit there.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're overselling.
Oh, like when John killed 3 of them in the jungle.
The pacing of the plot depends on the speed of the combat.
So,
like, they're really good at dealing with big threats, but they kind of suck at dealing with small threats like pirates and raiders.
actually, I have a question about the scope of the Imperial. So the Imperial Navy doesn't include civilian ships and it doesn't include rogue traders, correct, Dockmaster?
That is correct as far as I know, but they do maintain their own cargo fleet. They have a basically merchant marine that supports the combat craft.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they do have their own logistics train that's sort of built into them then.
Yeah.
And in fact, most of their cargo ships are quite heavily armed by themselves. I mean, they can't stand toe-to-toe with anything, but they can convince things to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If like a fucking cargo sloop or like a modified bulk hauler or something rolls up, they can defend themselves. But beyond that, it's
more of a make it too expensive to risk it being involved.
It's like Q ships essentially. It's not gonna tell even like a frigate or destroyer to fuck off, but you know, if you're a U-boat, it's gonna fuck you over something fierce.
But to go back to the scale problem, and it's worth reiterating because the most basic class of ship in their fleet is kind of their frigate or escort class.
Mm-hmm.
And the Firestorm is kind of a good example of it because it's actually new construction, relatively speaking, in the universe. And the damn thing is 1.8 kilometers long and has a crew of 25,000.
Yeah.
Jesus.
To get further onto like the actual scale of the Navy itself, every sector in the Imperium has a battle fleet of a few dozen actual line ships.
That's
And
a
then
lot
don't
of
forget
seamen.
about those. What are those orbital things
Jesus.
called? The fortresses they have that are so freaking
Star
dangerous.
forts and stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
That's insane. And what is actually the proper term for an officer of the Imperial Navy? Because I did just make a seaman joke, and I want to be able to
Voidsman.
make them, but I only want to make them if they're actually valid.
Voidsman, essentially.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Well, that'd be more like just like general seaman type phrasing
Apparently,
for it.
apparently they have armsmen and voidsmen, and then you have an entire subclass of indentured workers and slaves, so that gets even more complicated.
You don't address those.
we can address them. We can address them.
Yeah.
But okay, yeah.
No,
so
I meant
Voidsman.
as
That's
a
an
person,
interesting...
you do not address the indentured crew.
And
and
in terms of capability and training, relative to something like the Imperial Guard or a PDF, what would you consider a Voidsman to be, relatively speaking? Are they more trained? Are they very specialized?
I'd say it's specialized, but I could be wrong on that. Because it very much is as far as I've seen and heard, it is very much comparable to our modern navies and how they have machinist mates third class or navigator first class or something like that. But
Yes, although I guess because it makes the story more entertaining for you squishies, the officers seem to be more numerous than our current navies have them, even as numerous as they are in current Navy ships.
So, a little top
on
heavy.
on an enlisted to officer scale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they actually separate bosuns and shipmasters as warrant officers as opposed to strictly enlisted personnel.
Yeah.
Now they don't technically have commissions, but they are a class higher.
Yeah.
And we can go more into how that is laid out in organization, but that's kind of interesting that they seem to be... Well, this is an Imperial or an Imperium thing I've noticed, is they love to be really granular about the gradation between their hierarchy.
Also,
And it seems like they always the ones who are higher on the hierarchy tend to be just a bit taller or have a larger head.
well, yeah, that's because on the human side, the higher up you are, the more well fed you
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And you primates do love your decorations, so I mean,
Yeah,
all of that gold contributes to the bulk in some way, right?
right.
Just another thing to continue on with the overall scale.
Mm-hmm.
Every sector has a battle fleet of a few dozen ships, right? Every sector averages about 1,000 cubic light years
Right.
across. The
That's...
Milky Way galaxy is something along the line of 8 trillion and change light years across. Last I heard.
Oh dear.
So you take into account the galaxy spanning nature of the Imperium and cut it in cut a third out or maybe half.
Has any administratum pencil pusher ever sat down with a calculator servitor and said, okay, let's do some ballpark back of the napkin math and figure out how many Voidsmen at arms we actually have? Has that ever been done?
I feel like that would be trying to count the population of a hive city. You ballpark it.
No, that's what I'm saying. Is even just back of the hand ballpark math.
Not that I am aware of.
Because it's got to be something insane. You figure that.
Well, the thing is,
these ships are
records and stuff like that are incredibly hard to keep track of on an overall imperial scale, just because of how long it can take for information to reach. And by the time it reaches,
your FTL communication is kind of
screaming into hell, essentially.
A lot of their messages were literally carried by the ships themselves, and we all know how successful that can be.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Pop the cork anytime casualty rate of a warp jump dips
Well, even
below
beyond the
50%.
casualty rate, the temporal dispersion of exit times is
Mhm.
ridiculous. You can pop out immediately, or you can pop out 2,000 years later and have no idea what the hell just happened.
Or 2,000
Hmm.
years before.
Yeah.
Which is
That's the
mind-boggling on
reason.
its own.
That's half my backstory in our Dark
Being
Heresy
jumped around in
campaign.
time.
Yeah. Ah.
So, in terms of the Imperial Navy's scale, the ships we already discussed, they're big. Even the smallish or medium-sized ones are large.
Mhm.
Can they basically effectively can be considered floating arcologies for the terms of things like supply? Do they grow their own food, or do they have berths of material that is generally non-replenishable, and they do have to make port?
I think it's a bit of a combination of both. Something I wanted to mention earlier, just due to the size of the ships, they actually have some of their larger ships have entire cultures on them that accidentally got cut off from the rest of the ship and have somehow survived on the ship for like hundreds of years.
That's
their own,
terrifying.
They basically welded up a hatch accidentally during some repair exercise and cut off like an entire group of indentured servants because they don't keep
Mhm.
track of those. And somehow they continued living.
Oh yeah.
I
Probably
mean,
growing
something's
like
eating all the rats.
no, probably like growing like scum slime on the walls and shit,
Yeah.
Probably.
scraping condensation off the pipes.
But no, I don't think they're like entirely self-supportive. If nothing else, they certainly need fuel and ammunition, and I would guess
Mhm.
it would bring on consumables at the same time.
Oh yeah.
And this is just my sci-fi logistics brain working. Has the Imperial Navy, or does the Imperial Navy engage in their own sort of mining foraging for resources or materials on a regular basis, or is that sort of a not unusual thing? Because in a lot of sci-fi, science fiction, at least hard sci-fi, the way that a ship manages to do things like exploratory attempts is that it has enough manufactorum ability to just go to a asteroid belt and go, nom 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 nom. Okay, this is all mine now. And now we have like 4 new ships.
The standard Imperial Navy, I don't think so. There are like Mechanicus explorer fleets that could and almost certainly do that, but
Yeah, leave it to the Mechanicus to invent a von Neumann.
Yeah, and that's I was gonna say
Like,
based on the books I've read, the impression I've always had is that every single ship is very home base oriented. They all have a home planet that they go back to.
the Imperial Navy, as I would put it and as I understand it, is not like an expeditionary or exploratory force. It is a reactionary force, it is a garrison force, and it is an offensive force.
Interesting.
Yeah. It doesn't go out and explore new things. That's
Exploring new things in that universe can get your head bit off.
well, yeah.
Yes,
That's
valid.
why
It's the Space Marine's job.
no, that they leave that up to rogue traders and the Mechanicus.
Yes. All right, so that's interesting. That's a good link back to the overview of the idea of the concept of these things.
Oh. Can't really think of anything else that goes into overview unless you want to get into like.
Well, I was going to say we kind of mix the overview and the scale, which is fine by me.
Yeah.
Because scale-wise, I would love to see. Has anybody when I was making that joke about the Administratum, has anybody ever like on Reddit or somewhere sat down and been like, okay, this is about how many Voidsmen at arms there are? Holy cow! Can we pull that number
I don't
up?
know about Voidsmen, but I do know about ships. Let's.
Interesting.
So, if you go into, there's a video that Arch did on like the scale and tactics and stuff of the Imperial Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something along the lines of like 8 million or 8. No, it would have been like 8 million or so ships, which is humongous compared to like Star Wars. And keep in mind, this is 8 million capital and line ships. That's not even getting into escorts and support vessels.
Or the logistics and crew involved in that.
One sec, let me look up, say, a Luna class cruiser.
And you have to remember that the universe is radically dense and you squishy things. I mean, I'm looking at a number of like 32,000 hive worlds, and hive worlds can have 5 to 10 hives on them, each holding 100 billion people.
A lot of them actually get into the trillions.
Yeah. So the simple number of humans in the universe is beyond reckoning. So yeah.
Yeah.
That is mind-boggling. That is getting into the territory of like.
Okay, so for a Luna class cruiser, mass 28 megatons, approximately 5 kilometers long and 8 kilometers of beam, 95,000 crew.
And then figure 50 of those per sector, and figure a couple
Oh no,
100,000.
that's just like not even getting into like battleships and shit.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just a standard Luna class cruiser, which is a standard class cruiser. Not getting into like battle cruisers or light cruisers. That's just like
Yeah, the
you've got
stock
maybe
standard
like
ship.
36 of those in a battle fleet of around
That's
the
an
same
immense
size.
amount.
Yeah, so that's closer to the size of the state of Florida than it is Long Island. I was mistaken.
That is an immense amount of not just population but material.
Oh yeah. 28 megatons of shit.
Is it ever discussed how they source that material? Are they? I know that there's Manufactorum and Factory Worlds and those other things, but like steel doesn't come out of the air.
No. If I were to guess, it would come
most
from like Forge Worlds, who are dedicated specific. Forge Worlds are like massive docking rings, like you have on Mars.
Yeah, but are they doing things like stellar lifting? Are they going to Iron Stars and stellar lifting for all the material? How are they getting the material itself? Is there?
I'm pretty sure they're
the
cannibalizing
Dockmaster might
planets,
know.
literally.
Yeah, they'll.
I'm pretty sure they're cannibalizing planets, literally.
Yeah, they'll.
Oh dear
tear
God! So they're
planets
the same thing as
apart.
the Tyranids.
Yeah. Well, no, the Tyranids eat the outside.
No,
the
I'm
Mechanicus eats the inside.
See, if they work together, they could just clean the galaxy
Well,
up.
just checking my conversion tables here because I don't understand how you're supposed to measure megatons as a weight. I thought that was explosive
It's
force,
28.
but apparently
No,
one
it's-
megaton is 1 trillion kilograms of weight.
Yeah.
So that's 28 trillion kilograms of weight.
That's a
I mean, I
lot.
guess the question is, does anyone know what happened to the asteroid belt in your solar system in 40K? Because I
Oh,
would
that's a fair
imagine
point.
the first thing they did once they started building fast enough is just completely remove that from the equation.
Oh, you just use it right up.
Yeah.
That's
Honestly, I think
immensely terrifying.
at some point they must have figured out like nuclear chemistry or some shit. No, maps of Sol do mention at least some of the ones I'm seeing do mention specifically like asteroid belts. So I
Yeah, but
don't
I'm
think
sure
they
they
went.
probably thinned it out pretty
Oh yeah,
well.
no, it's
And since at least about half of that by weight is silicate,
yeah.
and I don't think they need that much glass, I'm sure they left.
Well, you
they
can
left
use
some
silicate
debris.
and other shit like computers.
That's
right?
true.
But yeah, like I said, they probably figured out at some point how to use like nuclear chemistry to convert one thing to another, like on an atomic scale.
That'd be an interesting thing to look into because I'm sure the Mechanicus can do it, but I would be very surprised if the regular the stock standard Imperium could.
No, like I said, that's why the Mechanicus overall controls manufacturing of damn near everything. If if you want to get into like a hive world, they manufacture a lot of shit too, but it's not usually like massive amounts of tanks or even ships. It's las guns, it's flashlights, it's body armor.
As I say, it's almost light industry at that point.
Yeah.
As opposed to heavy industry.
And it's not even really industry. They use a lot of manual labor for that kind of stuff. Like Model T production line kind of shit.
Right.
And this is part of the reason why the ships themselves have such an immense population on them, is that you're looking at throwing shells the size of small buildings on your planet at other ships and then manually loading them by humies with ropes, and I'm not even joking.
Yeah, well, that's just
I did overhear that. That's
yeah. Not every ship, like I said, almost everything in 40K falls under the umbrella of they do this sometimes. Some ships actually have auto-loading mechanisms.
Yeah.
Or servers.
They're very old in that they're very advanced. But yeah,
which always boggles my mind that it's kind of backwards like that.
To
be fair though, if you're in a low grav environment, there's no reason why you couldn't load shells with just some pulleys and a bit of manual labor.
The funny thing is they seem to operate their ships at a full G.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm pretty sure it's artificial.
Pulleys and a bit of manual labor, after all.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's artificial gravity too. So you gotta figure that, like, you've got to figure the power consumption and that kind of shit in too. But yeah, they almost certainly do have pulley systems.
I mean, if it works.
Sometimes they're
mechanical advantage. It doesn't matter. Isaac Newton don't give a damn.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's not like...
This is what the forklift sentinels are for, too. Maybe not on the Navy, though.
Well, maybe for, like, point defense guns, but... Which Imperial ships do have.
Another
they have loader equipment.
Scale and overview, and this is one that's a bit more of a put yourself in the shoes of your regular voidsman, because you just mentioned the walker, the forklift walkers or whatever.
Yeah, they have a forklift variant of Sentinels in the Imperial Guard. I'm sure they have an equivalent in the Navy.
How compact are these berthings? Are we talking like nuclear submarine, where it's like I sneeze and my head bounces off of something because we're so tight and compact, or is there a lot of leg room, or does it significantly vary between ships?
It varies depending on where you are in the ship.
Okay.
And where you're reading.
Yeah, some area like
No, you first. Sorry.
Yeah. Some areas of a ship can be like vaulted ceilings and cathedral architecture, while others can be cramped, mostly in like sections of the ship most people don't really go to. Well, most important people. What you would consider people.
Can we say, on average, and this might be a good question for you, Doc Master, is that the average berthing, because the frame of reference and what I'm kind of basing my mental consumption off on this, and I could be completely off base, is Terminator armor was designed for ship-to-ship combat and boarding, so they probably built it to fit inside the berthing of the ships in general on average. Am I off base on that?
By berthing, do you mean like quarters, or do you mean just like the...
I'm sorry, but I mean like the actual like corridors, hallways, and doorways. So like a Terminator isn't going to go dunk into a regular doorway.
Well, no. You have to remember that the Terminator won't go dunk; it'll go through. So I don't know if that particular case matters.
That's valid. All right.
On average, in areas where it's mostly like enlisted crew, it's probably hallways comparable to like your average house.
Okay, so we're talking maybe 8-foot ceilings and everything.
This is a significant distinction. Is you have to remember that the 40K universe is very class dependent. So all of the officer spaces, specifically like the bridge, will be wide open, large, big glass windows, ornate architecture, all that good nonsense.
Yeah, but
once you get down to the engineering spaces, there will be corridors that most humies couldn't fit through, but still there's something down there that has to be fixed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So send Jimmy's kid, because he'll fit there.
And it actually, it's very reminiscent. I worked in a shipyard for a couple of years, and I built Navy LCS class ships.
Mm.
And
my fault.
the way the hulls are designed there are sections that while building it, I physically couldn't get into. They had kids that they specifically hired because they were 110 pounds and could weld, that could fit up into these little cavities in order to make sure that everything was welded and sealed properly.
Yeah, but
That's
that's like the outer hull.
And like you can picture that throughout the ship, because again, the ship is supporting the entire infrastructure the size of multiple cities. Like I said, this thing is the size of the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's going to be so widely varied. But what you read described in books and whatnot is the small size would be visually described as something the size of like the bay in a Star Wars Imperial destroyer.
I don't know about that. I'd compare it more to like the Pillar of Autumn.
Yeah, that's
like
a good.
The
That's
corridors
a good
in there.
comparison for where, like, when you're reading from Imperial Guard perspective.
Because
so it's very varied.
Well,
I think it's useful to give, at least for me, the best way that I understand something like this is to give myself sort of an individual man on the ground perspective of it, because it's a gigantic ship, but you're never going to see the whole ship all at once.
Yeah,
you're going to see the part that you're in.
One thing about
so
that.
In general, I'm kind of getting an idea of how it is.
One thing to combine that one and what Salty said earlier, the Imperial Guard, on average, rate higher than your average deck rating, so they will be berthed in the like middle class areas of the ship.
Moderately nicer.
Where their whole company will be stationed will be the size of massive open space hangar bays that are bigger than airports.
Yeah. Well, maybe not for companies, but it's like, imagine like a company-sized formation in berths like what you would see in like a FEMA center in a local high school sports center.
Right. Where it's big and it's just a place to put all your gear, all your stuff, and some cots.
A place where they can set up a temporary military base to stay at in between getting to where they're going.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm sure the Imperial Guard are not comfortable with it.
You got to remember the dedicated berthings are different from like weapons storage facilities too.
Right.
And in the example of the Terminator, you wouldn't have to fit it into the berthing. That could be structured differently, because the Marine would go down the hallway and then climb into his tin can and then go into a bigger hallway. The armor itself wouldn't have to have access to the entire ship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He'd just need to be able to flush out the entire ship, which is to say, I can't. Yeah, I can't fit in there. Brother Fuckicus, bring me your heavy flamer type shit.
Yes. I love
usually
that
at that point
the flamethrowers and fire are still terrifying on naval vessels to this into the fourth millennium.
Actually, speaking on that, naval armsmen in like the Imperial Navy used weapons that are basically like wire and glass bolas to avoid puncturing like vital systems in the outer hull.
Really?
Well, what I'm guessing is like the pressure hull compared to like the outer hull. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a very commonly described situation to pit any faction that you're reading as the protagonist for in a book against the Navy is, they have firearms where they shouldn't have firearms. The whole Naval Guard is going to come in and block you into that hallway until you give it up or die.
No, they'll just fucking throw a flash bomb in there and then shoot you in the face with a glass shotgun.
They function.
The irony of that is
much like SWAT, as far as what's like what they have stationed on board. It's really cool to read it described.
The funny thing is, and this is again my own sci-fi awareness. A hole in the side of your ship is not like, I'm going to get vacuum through that like a high pressure. Like that. You ever see that video of the crab that's on a deep sea pipe and it gets sucked in and like it fits through a 1 centimeter inch hole?
No,
it isn't like that. When
no, the pressure difference
is regular atmosphere.
We're like Alien 4.
Yeah, you're not going to get vacuumed out of a pinhole. But it's
And then
still, they
the
probably
part-
take it. The thing is, they're the guys that are going to have to weld that hole back up, so they don't want to make any more holes than they need to.
Yeah.
The funny thing, though, is you have to remember that the hull of this ship is designed to withstand impacts that would leave significant craters on your planet, and now they're worried
Fair
about
point.
firearms.
Well, here's the thing. What I'm thinking is it's sort of like a submarine where you have an outer hull and then an actual pressure hull.
Oh, so they sort of have like spaced armor almost.
Yeah, kind of.
Because I do see that that
Because-
prow doesn't look like it's part of this. I mean, it's
Yeah.
part of the superstructure. It's connected to the superstructure in some of these images. That
Yeah.
the prows that are very prominent, they look like they're a separate thing from the main pressure hole.
Well,
They probably are in that case, because the Imperial Navy has a hard-on for running into other ships.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if it works.
They have weapons mounted specifically in those prows, so they can shoot you and then run into you.
And make the hole
but
first.
I imagine like the level of Mechanicus construction is not on the level where they could make a massively armored, like outer structure completely pressure sealed. So
It might
what-
be that there's smaller individual like.
It
would make
might
more
be
sense to
on,
actually
like, a-
segregate the pressure areas and have
Yeah.
separate climate control things.
Well, I don't know if they like separate the entire ship. I think it's like they build like a pressurized hull, and then they build all of like the armor and the fittings onto that hull.
There is a ship that actually does canonically, and I know this. I don't know why I know this, but I know this. I think because of Terminators. It's a very light ship, but the back half of the ship, where the engine and stuff is there's a single bloody hallway, and the hallway has a quick it is.
I know exactly.
There
what
is
you're
life
talking
support
about.
systems on both sides of that.
Yeah, that was a modification to a certain class of ship during the various wars for Armageddon, while they were fighting orcs, because orcs really like getting close, and what's closer than a boarding action. So they
Right.
basically split the ship in half. They put the weapons and command center up front, and then they put all of the engineering shit in back. And then they put separate life support systems, and there was like maybe one or two hallways in between those two
Right.
sections. So that way, they can take like the ship, like they can take the engineering space, and you can still keep shooting without having to worry about the orcs coming through, because set up an autocannon there, no one's coming through.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, and speaking of,
And a ship. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I had a
Well, I was
question
just
about.
gonna say,
scale.
speaking of making holes in things, you have to remember that, speaking of boarding actions as well, boarding actions in this universe aren't just like pulling up on the airlock, knocking nicely, and letting yourself in. The Imperium maintains dedicated craft that their entire purpose is to simply run headlong into a ship and just break through everything until it finally stops, and then you let the Terminators out and make the hole bigger. So their
Yeah.
their
Boarding
concept of
torpedoes.
maintaining atmosphere and ship has to be bizarre.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then you have things like the Dark Eldar who love poison. So
Yeah.
you probably, after meeting one Drukhari, you're like, all right, we're separating everything.
Yeah. One thing I've seen from like Battlefleet Gothic videos and stuff, they have boarding torpedoes. They have like dedicated like boarding craft, and then they have like the Space Marine shit, like the Saestus the Saestus assault ram, which is basically just a fighter with a with a giant fucking Magna Melta cannon, and then like two like troop bays slapped onto it. But
I'm surprised nobody's thought of making the torpedo just do a turn and burn. So
And
on
they
on the
have-
way, it just uses its thruster as the Melta.
it depends on what type of fuel they would use, because if it's like solid fuel, you couldn't really attenuate it like
fair
that.
I love the idea of turn and burn
Yeah,
maneuvers.
they-
They're very cool.
They also do use. I've seen them use like drop ships and gunships to board, but
In Salvation's Reach, they bolted to the side of a hangar bay
Mhm.
door, like a metal door, and
No,
they
no,
literally
they-
had essentially a Lehman Russ with a drill on the front of it punched through that door.
No, what they did was, I know exactly what you're talking about. What they did was, they
What?
they latched onto the side of an asteroid that was basically like adamantine and shit, like made of very dense, very hard materials, and then they brought
They
in,
drilled through that to get into that bay.
yeah, and then they
Okay.
brought in like Krieg siege equipment for like
Yeah.
drilling through the like defensive fortifications to get into.
That's
The
insane.
Hades breaching drill, I think it was called, but
But-
It was effectively like a tank with a drill attached to the front.
yeah,
That
it
was open
um,
cockpit.
that whole
Actually,
thing
that's a
was-
great
yeah. Anyway,
That's a great question to ask then is, does the Imperial Navy, I know they have the Voidsmen, I know that they have
The
all their
armsmen,
various things. In terms of actual mechanized equipment, is that like a regular thing they have? Is it stated anywhere that they have not just access to craft, but to, you know,
No,
lifters or any
the-
other kind of heavy equipment?
as far as I can tell, like the Hades breaching drill, that was specialized equipment they had to have like brought aboard.
Okay.
Yeah, they ordered that in.
That
That came with a dedicated squad of people who knew how to run it.
Okay.
It wouldn't surprise me, however, if they had like patrol vehicles for like inside the ship on
Mhm.
certain vessels. On like some of the really big ones, like little fucking.
Or even
carts or
I was thinking more like things like if you're going to need to be doing service in vac, having a vehicle that can mag clamp or grav clamp to the side of the ship and just go and then go to the hole and go "Meh," and fix it.
At that point, they'd just use like void suits, or you'd be in a dock where they'd have like if you're trying to replace like actual like armored hull plating, you would be in a dock essentially. You can do internal.
So that's not part of their
repairs.
doctrine. Is not.
Yeah, no.
Because I know in the IRL Navy, they do have a small complement of ship scaffolding tools and other things to make repairs in field
Mhm.
so that they can limp home.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there's ever been a noted equivalent in the Imperial Navy of something similar, or are they just cobbling together what they have?
There
if that
might be
situation
like
occurs?
repair support vessels that have that stuff, but I don't think they have.
Mhm.
Like they have internal damage control teams.
Okay,
but,
so they
like-
prefer to be inside the ship when they're
Yeah.
doing repairs.
They do have void suits for like stuff you can do with like a couple dudes. But I don't think they have any like actual like
Because if I
repair
were
tugs or something.
like running one of these naval ships, that would be one of the things that I would do. Is I would have regular exterior, from tip to stern, inspections, and I do it in segments, obviously, because this giant ship, there's no way I'm going to be able to get one team to do it.
The Mechanicus Navy might have that stuff. Because you
Which
got to
makes sense,
remember,
considering being a
anything
robot
to
as I
do
am.
with construction or mechanical stuff usually is either done by a specialist trained by the Mechanicus or a member of the Mechanicus themselves.
That leads us an awesome segue directly into technology, then,
Yes.
because it seems like there's, and I'm sure Doc Master has a lot of thoughts on this. Is there a big knowledge gap in literature, in the books, in the rules, whatever, between the Imperial Navy and their capability of servicing their ships and maintaining them or making them work, and their knowledge of that technology, and the Mechanicus, who seem to be the ones that are making it from the
Yes,
beginning?
there's a huge knowledge gap between those two. A lot of the voidsmen on the ship have no idea what they're working on. They just know that the guy told them to keep doing this, and it'll keep working.
Yeah.
And
Oh no.
just keep doing that.
It's
They
very
don't
much.
really-
It's very much like I keep in mind I read this in a Tom Clancy novel, so it might be completely wrong, but it's very much in line with his depiction of the Soviet Navy, wherein the crew is taught to do one task without thinking, and most of the officers do like the actual, well, this radiation detector in like the reactor compartment is broken or sabotaged, I need to fix that. It's the actual officers that are trained to do.
So would it be the
technical
officers or would it be the Mechanicus? Because it seems like they almost need to have a...
it would be the Mechanicus, and I think every ship has a detachment of the Mechanicus, specifically for running the ship.
Right.
Just because
Can
of
you...
the nature of technology. And
Well, yeah, they
Can you-
definitely have tech priests on board because they have to keep praying to the machines, right? I mean,
yeah.
Right. I was going to ask, can you expand a little bit more on the gap in technology and knowledge? If there's any specific examples, I don't know if there's any examples in any of the books of it, but if there is, that'd probably be something interesting to refer to.
What comes to mind? They do have like on manufacturing worlds with like heavy industry. That's not typically like forge worlds or anything. Like berths to dock ships and stuff, but you know, it's odds are it's run by the Mechanicus, sort of like essentially dry docks for ships. But
Right.
they might like the crew might be able to do like internal repairs, like welding up bulkheads and shit, or you know.
Well, because that's the thing is that from a person who has an understanding of how manufacturing works, a lot of the repairs that you would have to do on a day-to-day basis wouldn't be simple. So it makes sense to have Mechanicus there, but you'd need a pretty big complement of Mechanicus to maintain a ship like that, unless they are delegating to things like servitors or indentured servants or even the voidsmen themselves.
They almost certainly have in fact, they do have large contingents of servitors to help with running the ship and help with repairing the ship. Another thing, and to like sort of expand on the technology level, they have what are essentially coal-fired like generators for like auxiliary systems. Like outside of like the engines and the lance batteries and maybe like the gravity and the almost certainly the warp drive, which are powered by like plasma fusion reactors. They have crews, and this is expounded on in either Salvation's Reach or the book right after that in Gaunt's Ghosts.
Okay.
They have giant fucking furnaces that they just shovel promethium into,
and that makes
to power like life support and lights and shit.
And that makes perfect sense to me, because a ship this large, you're actually going to, especially if they're using alternating current, but if they were using direct current, God forbid, do not do that. Over those distances, the resistive heating through the wires themselves would leach all the power out, and all you'll be doing is warming your ship up. So it makes sense to have distributed power.
So I don't know how specifically it works, because the Mechanicus themselves don't.
And
they're the tech heads. They refer to electricity as the motive force, which is its own like mystical force, like kind of like how they
as a robot, I can confirm that it is a motive force.
Kind of like how they viewed electricity early on.
Yeah, galvanic.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of technology, when it comes to so we've already kind of talked over sort of the environmental technology that they appear to have, which is a bit hand-wavium. It's a bit, we're not quite sure. I don't think there's any specific examples of how
Could be anything from like fucking like the, I don't know what the
gravity-generated atmosphere on bigger ships.
Right, and the fact they have gravity generation.
Well, I'm thinking like the hydroponic farms type
that mass. There must be
of
some
life
form
support,
atmosphere.
if you know what I mean.
Hydroponic farms.
Or
well,
like,
they could also be using things like chemical reactions. Don't forget that
they could have giant
rebreather.
Yeah, they could have like
air scrubber technology.
Giant stores of water that they're just like dump a bunch in, and then it makes more oxygen or something.
Hilariously enough, we know that orc ships need water because of Infinite and Divine.
Yeah.
They harvested an entire planet's worth of water.
I don't know specifically why, but I have an inkling that it might have something to do with like the type of power generation they use, which could
Yeah, they
be,
have
like,
to cool their reactors and stuff.
well, either they're using like fission reactors, which would need water cooling, or they're using super like paradoxically primitive fusion reactors.
Well, I like to imagine the orcs are using like steam engines and old trains.
Or that they could be doing that, or using hydrolysis, which is just steam with extra steps.
Yeah.
That's what I always thought too. I pictured orcs literally just throwing coal over a fire.
Yeah, pretty much. And they just
Orcs smart enough to boil water. Confirmed.
There are images. There's official art of them out the side of these ships with oars. So why not?
Oh man.
Hey, there's enough particulate, and even in hard vacuum, you know, you move it fast enough, it'll. Ore-driven orc ships. Let's go.
Okay, if the oars work, it's not because of any reality. It's because the orcs think it works.
Enough for me.
But technology. So we have we kind of went over the environmental technology and a bit of the reactor technology. I remember reading, and I forget if this is official, the sheer horror of refueling these reactors. I'm sure that we've all read that bit. Yes?
I don't, not directly know. I've heard of it. The one where basically, in order to change like the fuel core of what I'm assuming is some sort of nuclear fusion reactor, is basically they send a dude in with a rad suit and he just fucking dies once the job is done
not a
because
rad
of all
suit.
of the radiation.
Oh, did they have a rad suit doc? I'm not sure they did. I thought it was just a casket that they had.
I think they just send in one of the indentured slaves and tell him to put this thing in that hole, and if he makes it out, he'll still die shortly thereafter.
Sacrifice yourself for the ship. Go.
They probably don't even tell him.
Yeah, pretty good luck.
Which does kind of like fit onto the old trope of they need to sacrifice like one human for a warp jump or some shit. Or was that chaos?
Clear if it was a 1-to-1 equivalency, but they definitely burn out over time according to apparently the new rules. I'm told this is an addition.
What? The Sears?
So apparently, so the Geller, however you want to pronounce it.
Oh, the Geller fields, yeah.
Yeah, initially they were generated simply by a machine, according to older stories, and now apparently they require a psychic sensitive human to be inserted into them, and at some point they'll burn out and then you replace them.
That's fucking stupid.
The light bulb.
I prefer the old version where it was just a machine that the mechanicus didn't quite understand how it worked.
I mean, in universe, it makes more sense because I don't believe that there's any example of a machine. Oh no, there is one example of a machine being able to capable of psychic ability, and the head of it now belongs to the Imperium.
Well,
you remember that one?
Not quite. No.
The hive intelligence that rolled up and was like a problem for a very short amount of time, and then I believe it was the Grey Knights that showed up and just
oh yeah, the blood tithe or whatever the fuck. The blood tithe.
It was a hive mind hyper intelligence that was taking people over, if I remember correctly, and it was a machine, but it wasn't a human machine, and they never really explored its origins. It was some kind of alien technology.
Well, the thing with, and this kind of like
I haven't read that book.
This kind of touches on the hell part of the lecture, but
right.
Geller fields, the way they work is they project a bubble of reality around the ship to sort of like sneak through the warp and avoid all of the demons and sort of like drive off the demons that do notice them.
Yeah, because reality is anathema to the warp, which
so
I have theories about why they call Big E anathema for that very reason, but we're not going to talk about that now.
So
Short answer, this is the reason that Warhammer's science fantasy.
Yeah. So having a psyker as sort of like a filament for a Geller field makes zero sense to me.
You know,
they're warp touched. Yeah, I guess I can see that.
Yeah, because like you're projecting.
Maybe.
You're supposed to be projecting reality around the ship, and psychic sensitive people, what they do in the warp is they act as a candle.
Yeah, it works both
It's the
ways.
lantern concept, yeah.
Yeah. So plugging them into what is projecting a field around your ship makes zero sense.
I'm sure there's some way to hand wave it, but
Yeah.
just like anything in the 40K universe, right?
That's exactly what it is handle. It's
Yeah.
meant to be like it works both ways. They need the warp energy from the Psyker in order to power the thing, but in order for that warp energy to go through that's the downside. That's how
Unless
I
they're
always
cramming
understood it
all of
anyway,
the
like
instead of creating a bubble of warp energy, they're creating a vacuum or a bubble of reality. They're
I
creating a
imagine
vacuum of
it's
warp.
I imagine it's based off of the like Necron monoliths on Cadia that work to like nullify the warp, but that's just me.
it's
Well, you have to remember
it's
to do this
space
in concept,
magic,
yeah.
man.
You got to remember too that the navigators on these warships are technically mutants and technically psychers, and the Imperium simply looks the other way because they're
Yeah.
necessary to get the ships from point A to
They're-
point B.
They're a
Mhm.
very
So-
specific strain of psyker. Like a normal psyker can't become a navigator, and a navigator
Yeah.
can't become a psyker. Their third eye allows them to see into the warp in certain ways, and it's all weird. But yeah,
Navigators
I'll show you my third eye.
Navigators always struck me as like a proper exploration of the idea of what navigators were supposed to be in the Dune books.
Mm.
Yeah,
as
but-
opposed to like
As
space
opposed
slug.
to space acid trip.
there's
It has
there's gonna be-
context around it now.
Yeah.
there's going to be an episode when we hit 40,000 subscribers on something adjacent to that. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Boy.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Anything else? in
Actually, speaking of the
technology?
navigation, that's actually a great piece of technology that we may want to talk about. If the navigators, as you mentioned, are effectively a living piece of technology, they were. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm building off of old source, but they are.
I'm
They
not
are.
quite sure.
They were created.
Well, the vagaries of 40K is they could either A, have been like intentionally created, which given how unstable they are, like they can vary wildly in mutations. I think it's more the second option in that they were sort of a natural evolution as part of being like a psychically sensitive race.
But it was definitely
like-
reinforced along the way, though, because they're
Oh, yeah.
all the navigators from the Imperium come from the Navis nobility, which is a dedicated incestuous family that all they do is produce these damn things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that smells like Malkador putting his finger on the scale a little bit. If I want to
Yeah.
be completely honest, like he kind of was like, let's just tweak that a bit.
It's most
See what
likely a combination of the two, where it's like, oh, hey, these people can see into hell, and we kind of need to use hell to get from A to B. Let's like, let me just pull out like my genetic screwdriver and tweak a few things. And then...
Yeah, because I don't think that there's any example of even Big E or Malkador going in and creating specific warp powers with people.
I think that
Even
so-
even one of their magnum opuses, Magnus, was a total shit.
Oh, yeah.
It was a total colossal goat fuck.
I think that it's like the actual modification was like way back during Old Night or the Dark Age or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And where the Emperor was just hiding in the background. He's like, hey, these guys are useful. Let me like fix them up a little bit to make them good.
And they've had enough time. I mean,
Oh,
think
yeah.
about it. 40,000 years is a long. It's not long on an evolutionary. Well, it kind of is, but it's long enough to do some significant modification and
when
selective
you're-
breeding.
Apparently the great houses that produce
It's
the
lo-
navigators actually predate the Imperium by thousands of years.
Oh yeah.
It's long enough to
Really?
breed chihuahuas from wolves.
I would love to see some books that explore that. Some
Yeah.
literature that explores just that
Well,
house.
One thing I want to see is a Horus Heresy book where an entire like battle fleet from, you know, some random sector in 40K ends up in there, but they're not going to show
Yeah.
us that kind of shit because GW is a fuck. Anyway,
No, I won't put a solid no on that. I'm sure. I mean, they did the Cardassians. I remember when Cardassians were in development.
Cardassians?
Or Kadakarons, or however you want to pronounce that.
Yeah,
The Shark Boys.
yeah.
Shark Boys.
Yeah, the space sharks, yeah.
And it started as a, haha, this is never going to be a thing. And then it was like, nope, it's a thing now. And they're cool.
Also, like, to expound on, like, navigators as technology, they are plugged into the ship to help guide it through the warp with the warp drives and shit.
Oh, okay. So is that like a full, like, NIR neural interface link, or is it more of a...
I'd compare it more to, like, the Matrix, but not quite. They just, like, plug a few cables into the back of your skull, and they're like...
Because I'm sure we haven't gotten a narrative from that perspective yet.
I don't think so, no. But the way I've seen it in various games and literature, they basically just plug cables into ports on your head.
Okay. Well,
all right.
that could be
Probably
anything.
similar neural interface like the what are those mechanical guys? The Mechanicus use when they
The
start
Titans,
converting their bodies into
the mind
Okay.
impulse unit,
Yeah.
And let's not forget the truly horrible aspect of the navigators, because the whole, that warp eye concept that was mentioned previously allows them to see basically the lighthouse being put out by Big E on his throne by way of literally burning psychers on the scale of thousands a day.
Yeah.
And that's probably reminiscent to the idea of I see the sun is a song is a scream kind of thing, where it's like, from a distance, it's probably really beautiful, and then you get closer, and you're like, "Oh, balls!"
So, anguish, like emotions and shit, in
The warp are powerful.
in 40K show up in the warp. The emotions of psychers, particularly the torment from being burned alive in a giant psychic furnace, would shine even brighter.
Yeah. So they're doing all of their navigational checks off of the light provided by thousands and thousands of deaths a day, and this is what holds Imperium together, basically.
It's
'cause it
1,000
goes out
deaths
their
a day,
hose.
but yeah.
And I know that they had a knockoff version of it. I believe it was the Sisters that had the knockoff version, and then Angron went over and bonked it.
It wouldn't surprise me.
He bonked it so hard he cut the planet in half.
Yeah, another thing to expound on, captains of ships in 40K,
Yes.
not always, but sometimes, and sometimes often, they will also be plugged into the ship, and very sometimes they will be, like, completely immersed in, like, amniotic fluid tanks and completely merged with the ship systems.
Ooh, that's a good technological question. Thank you for bringing that up. So if you've ever watched anything like The Expanse, you understand that that G-force will kill the shit out of you. These are very big ships moving very, very fast and maneuvering.
Well, the funny thing is they're not actually moving that fast. I was looking at some of the numbers, and some of even the quicker ones pull about 5 Gs.
Yeah.
Really? That's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not nothing, but it's nothing.
But
I mean, they do most of their long distance travel in the warp, of course, but
Yeah.
if you're just doing like
Well-
in-system travel, a planet-to-planet trip will take a while at only 5 Gs. Yeah.
Another
and
thing
is that
on
including
that,
things like combat maneuvering?
What was the question?
Combat maneuvering does that include things like combat maneuvering?
Yeah,
like,
that's basically their peak output. But something
Really?
to also think about is these ships are that large, and 5 Gs is not nothing, admittedly. And you're starting to run into things like the Roche limit and the ability for the materials they're using to actually hold themselves together under the forces of being, 8 kilometers long,
that's a
moving
very good
5.5 Gs, and they have to have something approximating a structural integrity field, which might explain why boarding actions such as like ramming through the hull aren't as big a deal as they would be for Expanse Universe, where you just vented the entire ship. Well, if you have a structural integrity field, you can probably have an atmospheric containment field on top of that too.
it could
And I
be
believe
like
that there is canonically a thin skin of atmosphere around most of the ships. I believe that that's how Gilliman survived, or at least that's theorized as to how Gilliman survived in the vac for as long as he did, is that he was close enough to the
Gilliman
ship.
survived because he's a Primarch, and Primarchs are just mega space marines, and
Space Marines can already survive VAC for X amount of time.
yes. One thing, it's not specifically mentioned anywhere in 40k, but they almost certainly do have like inertial dampeners and shit too.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to get to. Is because if they have artificial gravity, then they probably have the ability to control or like G's in general.
Yeah.
So that would probably.
The thing is, they just don't know.
The structural
about it.
field is that actually the structural integrity field, is that ever explicited anywhere in the lore? Because
I don't
that's a
think
super
so,
interesting
no.
thing for me.
Like I said, it's very much like it's probably there. Like the inertial dampeners, the integrity field, those are almost certainly there just due to like the limitations of reality. It's just not specified because no one.
Because I mean, we have power weapons.
Well, yeah, no. It's just not specified because no one in universe that we've run into specifically knows about it or mention it. And
so
if
what
they
I have
do,
to do is I have to go into the universe as a Necron, walk up to Petarabo, kick him in the shin, and be like, "Hey, explain this."
I like how you called him Pedo Robbo.
Oh yeah.
Petarabo. I always mispronounce
like
everything.
being
It's my Chicago accent. It comes out in weird ways.
Just sounds like you're calling him a nonce.
I don't know about like Perturabo, but like
Peter Turbo.
Ferrus Manus or the Emperor would certainly know.
Well, he's
but
dead. No.
like I said.
I can ask his hands.
Yeah.
But this kind of loops back to your initial question about the difference of technological understanding between the Mechanicus and fleet. I'm sure the Mechanicus has inertial dampeners or whatever spat out by one of those machines that makes whatever the standard template
SDCs or whatever.
Yeah. And it's spat out by the machine. They plug it into the ship and it works. And then the crew gets on board and they're like, "Oh, cool, we have gravity and we're not getting squished at 5Gs. All right, fine, whatever."
Well, the thing is, I don't think
and
the
I hate how real that is.
I don't think the Mechanicus knows what those machines do either. They're just like, "Oh, they're holding up the blueprint and we're like, we don't have this yet. Go get one."
Yeah, there's like a little engineer's note written in old like 17 times old Gothic that says, "Hey, put this on here, otherwise bad stuff happens." And they translated it and they're like, "This is the holy instruction. We must do this."
I think it's more like it's part of the blueprint, and the Mechanicus build to the blueprint and almost never deviate. So it's like, here is the holy, the holy eye.
Actually,
here is the
has an
holy
interaction
eye.
with Mechanicus about that. That's why I thought Petarabo is because he specifically has an interaction with the Mechanicus where he looks at a Mechanicus and is like, "You are just disgusting because you don't know anything that you're doing. Get out of my way and never speak to me again."
To continue on to my bit.
Yes, sorry.
Yes, here is the holy eye box. We must install it. But what does the eye box do? I do not know, brother. It is in the blueprint. It is in the whole. Yeah.
This is also a universe where asking that question can get you killed.
So, yeah. Well, no, like Malatex and stuff exist. It's not like straight up heretic to try and want to know something like that. It's more like
probably shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, it's not that they
and
probably shouldn't.
You have bigger concerns as
that
well.
They don't really care.
They follow the realistic.
They follow the holy writs, and that's how it goes.
It's very realistic. As somebody who has worked with building blueprints for people to create, the people that are creating it do not know what it does. And I'm sure Saltius, I believe it was the one who worked in the dockyard, yes?
Yeah.
You can attest to this as well, that I don't know if you've ever spoken to anybody like who is a naval officer, even a naval person who's got some engineering experience or knowledge, unless they're specifically there to know how the ship works, nobody really knows how every specific thing does anything or why it's there.
Everything is top secret. You only have access to the information that is at your space for your specific job.
Yeah, it's siloed.
And the only people who have an understanding of how everything works are on the engineering level. And the only reason that I can say they know how everything works is because what they're doing is like the electrical and the duct work and the routing for everything.
Yeah.
So like they don't know how the ship was actually built, but they know where everything's going to go in it.
Right.
HLC actually did a video with his sister, who is an engineer on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, and that's about what she said. She's like, yeah,
So-
I know how to do everything on... Well, no, she was propulsion, but she's like, yeah, I don't really know everything about the ship, but there are people... But, like, the specific, like, engineering people, they know... I'm just an engine mechanic.
Yeah. Story from that job. One day, one of the engineers was coming through, and he dropped his clipboard.
Uh-oh.
And I was the closest person to it. And the way that we were taught to handle that by the company was do not leave it, stop what you're doing, do not look at it, do not let anybody else touch it. Tell the first person who approaches you to go get security.
Oh,
Period.
no.
And it's so funny that
So I understand
it's,
they're straddling
it's very
a clipboard for
similar
half an hour
to
until my supervisor came over and asked what the hell I was doing. My supervisor, being union, thinks, okay, well, I can just pick it up. I basically had you cannot, period, go get the security officer.
yeah.
If I let you pick it up, you will have to fire me in a couple hours.
I think that
And
is
sure enough, he goes gets the security officer. I spent the rest of the day in that security office
getting quizzed?
signing paperwork.
Yeah.
Jesus, fuck.
It's so interesting that there's a parallel there to the real world, even if it's probably unintentional. I don't think that was an intentional parallel.
Well, but you can imagine how the mechanicus would react to, you know, Naval Ensign number 6, No Name Joe over here with his fucking hands in a panel that it shouldn't be because his door won't open to his sleeping quarters in the morning.
Have you done the holy writs? Because, like, even to remove a maintenance panel, there's a fucking sermon.
Mm-hmm.
In
That's
the
just
mechanics.
necessary, though, yeah. So to kind of loop back to that, it's not quite that bad from what I've been gathered from.
That sermon is
I've
more like an
borrowed from
SOP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not quite that bad from the officers who swung by the shipyards talking about how they do what they do on their ships. It's very role dependent. For the USA and Navy, there's a concept called the engineering officer of the watch. And this is actually something that any of the officers who are interested in it can do, but typically engineering specific officers. And there's a whole educational program for it. And for example, one of the tests that they have to pass is they have to explain how a piece or an atom of fuel gets from the tank out the top of the ship, basically.
Oh, wow.
And all of the process that it has to go through to get to where it's going, the engine specifically, but all the steps along the way, all the pumps, all the spaces it goes through, they have to identify all of that. And they have to draw this all out in front of other people who know exactly what they're talking about.
Now I kind of want to... Yeah. I kind of want to design a ship that's just made to, like, gank that entire
Just be confusing.
test. So it's like the fuel tank is literally right next to the engine, and then the exhaust just goes straight up.
So the opposite of the littoral class.
It functions. The turbines don't break. It is the opposite of littoral class.
It's it's the power pack concept on tanks, but taken to a naval level.
Oh god. But
just unbolt like the fucking V-hole, pull it out, and service it.
The current Navy isn't quite as bad as the Imperium is, but you can see how you can start like self-referencing that into oblivion. Then you start ending up with highly specialized things, very heavily siloed, and here we are back at the Imperium again.
Yeah,
right.
Especially when technology is imitative in 40K and in no way innovative. Oh, we've literally the most advanced thing in the world they could find, and technology in the Imperium would not advance a single step, because all they would do is they would take the blueprints, take the STC for the equipment, and then put it all together and not learn a damn thing.
Yeah,
Yep.
the mechanic has stored that information. They have control over all of it.
So from technology, I think that I don't think there's anything else except for weaponry stuff, but we'll take care of that in
Yeah.
arms.
Arms is a
I'm gonna-
big part of like naval engagements in 40K, so that's its own.
I have a
thing.
couple of very specific questions about the weapons,
Oh, yeah.
especially the front prow, that I will get to then.
Mhm.
The organization, Dockmaster, I want you to take this away and kind of give us a breakdown of who is at the. Do you want to start at the bottom at like an ensign or the lowest person, and then work your way up, or work your way down? I'll give you free reign on that, but I would love to hear
Down, I
how you
guess,
proceed
yeah.
with this.
It follows actually a fairly, like someone mentioned earlier, kind of an age of sail structure where you literally have a Lord High Admiral of the Navy. And you have to remember that a lot of these officers are actually nepotistic to the point of being inherited.
Yeah.
the-
Actually, the Lord High Admiral of the entire Navy is a High Lord of Terra.
I was
So-
just about to ask that question. If they were a Lord of Terra, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And then and kind of like the current military structure, you have a Lord High Admiral of the Navy, and then you also have Lord High Admirals. It's like the
I
Master
see.
Chief of the Navy and then Master Chiefs. The same basic concept there.
Mhm.
And then it
Okay.
basically goes down the structure you would expect from there. If you have Lord High Admirals, you have Lord Admirals, and then Admirals, and then Vice Admirals, and so on and so forth.
I
There's
feel
some
like
weird
there would
interesting-
be a High Admiral somewhere without the Lord
Well, there
part.
probably are
but-
frequently High Admirals, but that's a different conversation.
Actually, yeah,
There's also some-
there are like drug and stim problems on ships.
Oh, imagine.
Just like a city. It's like, oh hey, the lieutenant was high on watch today. Someone go shoot the Obscura dealer again. But
And then
anyways,
there's some weird like edge case, like problem solvers too, like solar admirals. These apparently are held in reserve and are dispatched to problem areas that need additional assistance. And I can't imagine if that's like inquisitors doing, or not inquisitors, commissars doing commissar things, or if that's simply actually helping with the strategy.
So the officio perspective, or the officio perfectus, does have a specific naval branch.
Interesting.
Because
Oh,
it
by
is,
the way,
it is
High
mentioned.
Admirals
Yeah.
would be using low sticks, ironically enough.
Because like naval commissar, a naval commissar is specifically mentioned in the opening scene of Battlefleet Gothic 2,
Oh right, yes.
There's
where he
also-
literally shoots a crewman for freaking out.
For example,
There's also a functional branch of the chaplaincy. Usually, there's going to be
Yeah.
multiple chapels established throughout
Mhm.
on probably no matter what class of person you are on that ship, you probably have access to a chapel of some
Oh, yeah.
sort.
yeah,
Well, yeah, because that's a bulwark against heresy.
Yeah.
And probably
And that's why the-
demons.
And probably
that's why the joke of cathedrals shooting at each other isn't actually wrong.
Yeah.
no.
When the Pope
Once
is
you get to all
tired
the
of your
admirals-
shit. When the Pope is tired of your shit, so he drops a macro cannon round on your house.
Right.
Anyway,
so after
continue.
Admirals, you
Sorry, I
said?
had to make the joke.
Oh, it's fine. and you have to remember there's so many layers to this because, like we were talking about before, the fleet is so freaking massive. So not only are you employing a lot of people, you have the org chart. It's got to be a Mandelbrot sector a mile wide.
I imagine every sector has like at least a hive city-sized compound, either collectively or in one place to handle central administration of the fleets.
Well, and then you have to remember that all these have to, because the Imperial Navy is still interfacing with the Administratum. It's still interfacing with other branches. So you have to have clerks. Every single one of these is going to
Liaisons.
you're going to have a cachet. You're going to have a cabinet of clerks, liaisons, information.
Each ship is going to have its own
servers.
internal politics.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
One other thing is, it like the way it's broken down in like, it's basically this. Remember how I told you about the Imperial Guard and how they organize stuff on like a galactic level? It's the same thing. They have the Imperium, they have the Segmentums, they have the sectors, and then they have the subsectors and all that shit. And each one has its own level of. I would assume some form of admiral on each level.
In terms of that, are there any things that really stand out and mark the organization in a unique way? Sort of like how the perfectus, the commissars,
Yeah.
how they have a structure that's kind of on their own. Their structure is unusual, but their structure kind of hangs over everything else. Is there anything weird organizationally that kind of marks it out away from things like the Imperial Guard or the Administratum or these other very stratified hierarchical systems?
As the Dockmaster mentioned earlier, there is there is a very high ratio of commissioned officers essentially, but
So there's the high ratio of commissioned officers, but there's also the massive ratio of the nameless indentured servants in the basement, which is something that
but those aren't people,
yeah.
Right.
strictly speaking.
And I think maybe I'm not too familiar with the Guard personally, but the Navy seems to have more specialized individuals as well. Because you've got the navigator on board, you've got an astropath on board, which is basically how they do any kind of FTL communication. They have their own picked priests on board. They have they have individuals from other teams kind of writing with them.
That's got to be an
one
administrative
thing
boondoggle
is,
to juggle all of that,
like,
because everybody's probably vying for their own pet projects.
To compare the organization of the Imperial Guard and the organization of the Imperial Navy, the Imperial Guard has a lot of specialized organizations, like the different types of regiment and shit. And as the Dockmaster said, the Imperial Navy has a lot of specialized personnel on an individual.
And I know that we've been memeing about it this entire time, but from an organizational standpoint, is there any reason why they would use indentured servants instead of just servitors? Like, it feels like lobotomite servitors and
Cost.
It's not really indentured servants in the way that you traditionally think of it. It's indentured servants in the way that, like, generations ago, these people's ancestors might have signed a contract, but they've been aboard this ship having babies, and those babies grow up to do the same jobs for generations.
Yeah,
they are part of that ship.
Well, in one sense, yeah, they can be that, but two words also come to mind: press gang.
And also,
yeah, true. Like, there's multiple different aspects to it, but that's why, like, the term doesn't serve the same way it does in, like, real historical context.
You were saying, Dockmaster? Sorry.
Well, so I was mentioning the press gangs is definitely one thing, and they can apparently naval captains are given pretty much free reign on doing that if they want to. Although apparently most of the fleet is staffed by volunteers. If they're short on crew, they can go grab some crew.
Yeah.
And it basically depends on what planet they're grabbing crew from. If you can get educated people, they'll become actual crew members. But if all you can do is hit up a prison planet and grab what they got, well, they're going in the basement.
Yeah, or like a feudal world or something.
Yeah. Is that a continual issue for the Navy in terms of what they need? Like it seems like that would only be done if it was necessary. So is the Navy having a manpower shortage problem in a general sense?
Not significant one, except that you have to remember that these quote-unquote indentured servants have a very high attrition ratio. They're that are lethal to humans.
But they can they do reproduce amongst themselves and make more.
Yeah.
To expound upon that,
they usually self-govern as well.
Yeah. You can also just the number of hive worlds and just the sheer number of humans in the 40K universe. It's, oh, hey, we're short 5,000 people. Send a few shuttles down to the hive and pick me up some more,
And there's a line 5,000 deep waiting to be picked up because they think it's going to be a better life.
Yep. Yeah.
And do they run the thing that I would be interested in seeing, or if there's any information on, is do they get kind of a Sparta versus Helots sort of situation with the indentured, where there's a risk at any point that the indentured could just be like, sod this for a bag of chips, and piss into the reactor in no small terms, and kind of bungle everything.
There's
The
usually
indentured servant, the indentured / press gang don't typically work on like technically significant areas. They could
okay.
maybe like clog up some pipes or like jam up a loading system or something. But
And they are definitely at the bottom end of they have no idea what they're working on spectrum.
yeah,
Okay, so they couldn't even mess it up because
in some situation, there's others like
it's also out of fear, I'd argue, because like, oh, I broke this pipe, and then because like what could happen is, oh, I broke this pipe, and then the life support in that entire section of the ship just
Right.
Right, but you can end up with things like, I believe the video game Rogue Trader has an example of it, where it's like this section of the ship, this floor, these indentured servants, they have bred them, together. They're basically a big ass family, generations deep now. They have an understanding with the other floors around them, but they work on this specific thing in the ship, and they are proud of that.
Okay,
That is their identity. That is their competitive sense coming out, because that's how people are. But they're a big enough group to have their own government that has to sign treaties with other floors in order to get things done.
Which is mine. I keep forgetting the fact that these
Also,
ships are large enough for that to happen.
There are armsmen, and they do exist in part to prevent riots of the indentured class.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
on Rogue Trader ships, it's more of a situation where they have contracts with the overarching crew that runs the whole ship and tells it where it's going and what it's doing.
Command crew.
For example, like the big reason they have fucking literal like shot cannons, canister launching weapons, is riots. Because if there is a riot on an environment like of a 40k Imperial warship, you want that thing to stop immediately.
Water Filtration decides to unionize and takes all of their mechanicus as hostages. What do you do?
I mean, I would just go the
send in the armsmen.
KGB. What is it? One guy, the Spetsnaz. I go the Spetsnaz route. Just fill the whole thing with fentanyl gas and let everything die.
Jesus.
Well, I mean, you'd probably make a good naval officer then.
And the mechanicus will be fine. They don't breathe air anyway.
Yeah. And once you get on to further go on and move along, on an organizational level, once you get down to like ships, it's pretty close to what we have today.
It is. They don't have an ensign categorization. They go straight to midshipman, and then the chief warrant officers beneath that, and then the armsmen and the voidsmen have ratings and classifications like the USA Navy has. Petty officer, first class. He's a CT, so he's a cryptotech. Yeah. GM, gunner's mate. There we go.
Yeah.
He's a GM, first class gunner's mate.
We've actually got a former gunner's mate in here. She's not on though. Anyway, sorry. ADD brain.
I do too.
I think that actually on gunner's mate, we can go directly into what the gunner's mate is in charge of and manage.
Yes.
Which is the weapon.
So there are three primary staples of any void combat involving the Imperial Navy. Macro cannons, which are I don't think it's ever specified, but it's either like chemical propellant cannons or like magnetic accelerators or something like that.
A bit of a combination. They do have like traditional artillery. They also have plasma batteries, and then they have apparently ways of accelerating ionized deuterium at obscene speeds. So probably a mag launch system like that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I was talking about specifically the macro cannons for.
Yeah,
this.
that's just a macro cannon.
Okay.
Yeah,
What the?
that's
Not really
genuinely
just
terrifying.
The shells are typically the size of like high-rise apartment buildings.
Mhm.
Well, on the bigger ones, maybe more like a
Are these unguided?
yeah.
Yeah,
They are
macro.
unguided ballistic weapons.
Oh dear.
Yeah,
And you have to
Everything
remember
is calculated by a
These-
servitor for trajectory.
these are. Keep in mind, these are the ones that are typically loaded with fucking pulleys and ropes and shit.
Mm-hmm. You put a
And
nice
these are
image in
basically
here.
the
I'm gonna
broadside
use
guns
that.
on the.
Yeah, they're the broadside guns. There are
Yeah.
some turret mounted.
Those are typically lances, though.
Yeah. Really much to
Interesting.
go on there. They could have like variable warheads and shit, and like what he said, like fucking stupid sci-fi shit that no one really knows how it works.
I mean, if you're already going at a significant, if your projectile's already going at a significant percentage of C, and then you just make a cloud of fragments from that near enough the enemy, it's gonna hit, and it's gonna be going fast enough to punch holes through pretty much anything.
It's more of
It's giant
like,
space flak is what I would. That's what I would use.
No, it's actually like more akin to like the 16-inch guns on an Iowa class.
Really?
Yeah, it is.
So
It
you're
is
aiming for
big-
direct impact with these things.
It
Yes,
is.
no, they
yeah.
reduce scatter shot.
They might have like scattershot point defense or like flak point
Yes.
defense, but they don't.
Hmm.
The macro cannons are impact explosive weapons.
That's insane.
And
Uh,
there are some like specialized one, like that highly charged deuterium one I was talking about is actually basically a Star Wars ion cannon equivalent. It's called the disruption macro cannon.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they do have specialized payloads, but they're direct impact, direct fire. Yeah,
Yeah,
typical
it's-
broadside guns that you would expect on any pre ironclad warship.
Mhm.
That's insane.
These are and like we said, they are casemate or well, not casemate, like gimbaled
They're bunkered into the
guns.
Yep.
Yeah. Then you get down to lance batteries, which are las gun but for ship, essentially.
Yep.
It is.
You'll love to see it.
If you look at the ship
giant-
design,
yeah,
they're typically mounted right over the prow. They're the big gun right over the prow.
yeah.
Okay.
Above or below.
I
Sometimes it's mounted on the
have a
chin.
abiding love of the las weaponry
Yeah.
of the Imperium because I think it's a logistic like masterstroke. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it's brilliant.
Uh,
So to see them in big, in like super duper mega scale size and being used on a ship is just for me it makes me happy.
Mhm.
The nice thing about using them on the ship is, unlike the guardsmen, they don't just send off pulses. They are a continuous beam weapon. It
Oh dear
it,
God.
it sits there and hammers you.
Yeah.
Is it? I could have sworn they fired it in bursts.
It depends on the setting and the specific actual las weapon, but
Yeah.
they're frequently, especially in I just lost the name of that game. The one where you play with these ships. There are frequently cases where the beam is basically connecting the two ships.
Oh,
Oh, my.
High Gothic or Rogue Trader because they have a space.
High Gothic.
Okay, yeah.
I got it.
Or-
Okay.
Not High Gothic. Battlefleet Gothic. Fuck.
There we
Anyway,
go. That one. Yes.
and just for scale, a single lance cannon in any other universe would be considered a fucking doom laser.
Yep.
It's
This is why
That's-
40k is the best.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just great because the scale is ridiculous. I love it.
it is on the scale of like the energy projector from Halo, like the Covenant
Okay.
used to like glass planets.
Oh, and that actually is one of the questions that I was going to ask about the weaponry and the arms.
Oh, we'll
In
get
terms
we'll
of
get there.
Granada,
We'll get
Yeah, well, we'll get
We're
to
gonna get
we'll get to planet killers in a second, and then you get into torpedoes, which
Yeah, we ain't done with the ship to ship yet, because after las guns comes the torpedoes. Yeah.
yeah,
Got it.
Typically, unless you're in very close proximity, they are an area denial system. Typically, like what
Okay.
you would maybe see in like if you've ever played World of Warships, how you use torpedoes is you want to like funnel your enemy into a specific direction or area. That's how they use torpedoes in 40K. It is area denial because it's not gonna outright kill a ship, but it'll fuck up your day. And they have all kinds of warheads.
Every payload you can think of goes into those. And just to clarify, when we say torpedoes, we're talking about objects that are approximately 300 meters long for the larger ones.
Yeah, these are like the big brother of ICBMs. I don't know if they have nuclear payloads.
For anybody who's listening and wants a context for that, 300 meters is 3 times the length of a football field.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, one sec. Let me look at the Minuteman real quick.
And answer the obvious question, they can be guided, and they do in fact shove a machine spirit into them, which is somewhat terrifying.
They do.
Oh,
actually, I think they are...
Make it a malicious, angry robot that wants to headbutt something. Awesome.
I think they specifically are guided almost universally. It's just in the sheer scale of space combat in 40K, in the sheer scale of space combat in 40K, it is, you can't really project a sensor cone that big to guarantee a hit. You have to get a relative area of, like, guidance, and then you can hit, and then it'll lock on and hit, but yeah. Anyway,
that makes sense. Why do they just do what the orcs do and just stick somebody on the front of it?
That's what it could be let's just say it could be a machine spirit guiding it, or it could be a server.
Oh, okay.
That's actually
probably slightly more accurate.
No, because it's not really a limitation of the machine spirit. It's a limitation of like sensor range on something
the sensorium
that
package.
relatively
Gotcha.
On something that relatively small.
Because I forget the distances here are literally AU.
Yes. And these are the weapons that was mentioned previously, that when the Imperium decides you're going to ram their ship into someone else's ship, the torpedo tubes are typically mounted alongside that prow, and they lob the torpedoes at you and then run into you.
So for scale comparison, 300 meters for a torpedo, right? The Minuteman 3, the LGM-30, is it LGM? Yeah, LGM-30 Minuteman. The Minuteman 3 model is 18.3 meters long.
Yeah, it's quite a big difference in scale. Like these are things, and are they actually generally not traditional, contemporary? What's the word I'm looking for? Conventional chemical weapon, like explosive.
Oh no, they get fun.
They have all kinds of payloads.
Yeah, you can have a payload of Space Marines, for example. You can have a virus warhead, a plasma warhead, and then my personal favorite is a vortex warhead that actually rips a hole in space and time and then breaks a ship.
Yeah. Speaking of that, they do. Well, they have like plasma warheads and stuff too. But to continue on from vortex warhead, they do have what is it, like the fucking
Nova cannon?
Yeah, the Nova cannon.
Yeah.
Which is
is that the one where you cram a psyker in it?
No. A vortex or a Nova cannon is
basically a pocket black hole.
Yeah, it's stellar grade artillery. You fire it at formations of ships to either disrupt or destroy them. It is not specific like ship to ship weaponry. It is, I want that gone. I want, you see that wing of destroyers over there? I don't want to, Cam.
And since we're in space and we're already dealing with some things that are using nuclear things with the reactor, are there any nuclear payloads for these torpedoes, or is that not really a thing that's touched on? Or if it is a thing, it's sort of kind of lampshaded.
I mean, there might be, but I don't think nukes pack that much of a punch.
You'd be surprised. Hydrogen can do some really silly
Well,
things.
Yeah, but like, we're talking like pure plasma detonations, or
Yeah.
pocket black holes, or like literal like fucking fusion torches for like the melta warheads and stuff.
Yeah, the Melta would probably be the closest to a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, subatomic thermal agitation. It might.
Okay.
Now that I think about it, like a melta torpedo would probably just be like a Kasaba howitzer, but really
Yep.
fucking big.
Because I'm imagining things like the imagine the disruption to the motive force that a even a remote nuclear detonation would cause. Because you guys know that it does create a massive EM
Yeah.
pulse.
So this is where we get to the other side of the equation. These ships are enveloped by void shields, so
Oh, right, void shields.
actually do anything to it.
Yeah, and before we get to like ramming and shit, which does sort of combine with void shields. There's an interesting tidbit with that, but they do have point defense weapons,
Okay.
and they
I
do
would hope.
have like strike fighters and stuff, like
Yeah.
heavy bombers. But we would compare them to like, we're talking like what is it, like a frigate or cruiser? No, yeah.
Yeah.
A frigate or light cruiser in Star Wars is a fighter in 40K. We're talking a
Which
few
is-
dozen meters long, with all kinds of like waist gunners and tail gunners and shit. And then, you know, they have massive payloads of like one torpedo. And it's just an entire wing
Terrifying.
of these things launching them at, you know, targets.
Terrifying.
Yeah. But
And the shields are basically exactly what you'd expect them to be. They're functionally impregnable until they're not. I don't think there's any record of them like going down in sectors or something unless the ships are
No.
mounting multiple
So-
shields.
the way I've heard it described is you take a wire and then you bend it in a loop around, like, say, the front half of the ship, and then you just spin it at stupid fucking speeds to create essentially a protective cage, more or less, around the ship.
Because I know that the void shields. So void shields are things that are used on the Titans as well. They're like
Yeah.
a mass scale, and it could be. I don't know if this is ever explicited. I would love to hear if it is explicit what kind of technology they're sort of based off of. But it kind of is like, is that also something related to the Geller field, the void shields?
I don't think so, because they're mentioned separately.
They are warp based.
Yeah, they are
Oh,
warp
okay.
based, but I don't think they're like Geller field specifically.
Yeah.
So maybe the same
I
Same
think the
tech
way it,
branch, but
yeah.
not the same like strand.
Well, to
Kind-
loop back, it's kind of like the Dune Holtzman effect generators, where you use that for FTL and for shields and for other stuff.
the way I've also heard it described is anything that impacts other than another void shield, anything that impacts a void shield, like the energy from, say, the impact or the blast is shunted off into the warp.
Apparently, one hypothesis they don't is another case of they're not really sure.
Yeah, it's very much that. I've heard it described several
Could you imagine
different
being
ways.
a demon that's just hanging out? You're just sitting. You're like, say you're like a nerdling, and you're just hanging out. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
you're reading the latest recipe book, and all of a sudden, just
Yeah, like
a Mac
like a
cannon
giant-
round in your face. You're just like, what was that?
well, no, it doesn't like take the projectile and put it into the warp. It absorbs the energy from the impact and the detonation.
That's even funnier because you just get
Yeah,
tossed.
so like if it's like a lance
Just-
battery, if it's like a lance battery impacting it, it's just, oh hey, here's
just
a random
unclean
fuck-
one just gets
Well,
thrown.
that's a
like,
good
Yeah. Here's
It's
a
good
doom laser to
explanation
the
for why
face,
these
loser.
massive battles constantly start warp storms.
Actually, yeah. Because it's just you're just pissing the demons off from the void shields.
I would have expected it would be because of like the mass like entrance and exits into and from the out of the
Oh
world.
yeah,
And also all the
all
pain.
that energy brewing up into something.
No, from like the actual ships like entering and exiting the warp.
And all that emotion.
Yeah, that too.
Yep.
Yeah.
But okay, so with the void shields, you were going to say something about ramming.
Yeah.
Does the
Ramming
void shield effectively make the prow a power weapon?
effectively if the other ship doesn't have a void shield up.
Okay.
If the void shield is up and
You
the
just kind
void
of bonk.
no, if the void shield's impact, they can go bonk. But if you sustain that impact, one or both void shield generators will fucking explode.
Okay.
And
That's
in fact,
interesting.
some ship captains will install void shield generators in the prow specifically to take down enemy shields.
That kind of actually is an interesting point because I believe Dockmaster said that the shields themselves are not segmented. So is this an additional shield that's inside? Is it like layered Matryoshka styles then?
I'd
Kind of,
imagine
yeah.
it's like a directional one because, you know, they do have directional ones. And those can be significantly stronger than an omnidirectional one, like on, say, a void ship.
Hmm.
So it's just putting up like a screen of void shield, and then you impact the other void shield, and the necessarily weaker one, because it's covering the entire ship instead of just that one area, just pops. And then, you know, if yours hasn't exploded, you can just vaporize your way through the ship, or if it has, you now have a nice big ass chunk of metal to stick into their flank or even face.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. And they do
That's gonna-
actually, on some of the more advanced older ships, as always, in the case of Warhammer, older things are more advanced. They have actually layered void shields, where apparently they even went up to 3 separate layers. So when your outer shield starts getting overwhelmed, you turn it off, let it cool off, and let the other 2 handle it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And by the time,
So
like,
is it actually a literal issue of heat?
It-
Void shields, do they overheat or do they fail because they're overloaded in some other way?
both.
I'd
Okay.
imagine it's sort of just like a fuse blowing. Because, you know, it's the shield is shunting the energy out into the warp. I imagine the mechanism that does that can be overloaded rather easily. And either the mechanism itself blows out, or like the fuses and breakers and shit blow.
Or the poor psyker they shoved into it to make it work because apparently that's how all this works. No.
No.
Uh,
I refuse to accept that everything in Void Combat is powered by
powered by
psyker.
psychers.
Because psychers,
Yeah, the reactor is too. There's just
Yeah.
this.
because like even like navigators and like astropaths have their own like shielded areas on void ships for like
Okay.
warp travel to shield them from like the warp,
Mm.
so they don't shine like a fucking torch. Anyway,
They would, yeah.
yeah.
So if a ship, you mentioned that if the other ship doesn't have a void shield, how does that work out for people like the Tau that really don't have that sort of technology or
They
any
have-
equivalent?
They have ion shields actually.
Do they?
Yeah. Imperial Knights actually use a similar technology.
I couldn't think of anybody who doesn't have shield. Well, the orcs don't, but
I don't think Eldar do, or at least they don't use them too much, because the way they protect their ship is
Go fast.
Well, they go fast, and they also project like images and sensor contacts around them.
mm,
And also, orcs do actually have shields, by the way.
yeah.
It's called the Custom Force Field, and of course spelled with a K.
Yes.
of course.
They stop like they actually work really weird because if a projectile is incoming to a custom force field, if it's not of sufficient energy, it'll just pass through.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Whereas a void
So
shield
that's actually
stops
very similar to
everything.
the shields in Dune.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm not a Dune nerd, but anyway. There's multiple ways of doing exterminautics. Cyclonic torpedoes is a favorite, and how they work, it's like a tandem warhead massive melt-a-charge, which, hypothesis it's probably a Kasaba howitzer. And for those that don't know a Kasaba howitzer, it's a fission bomb, but it's like in radiologically opaque material, and then there's a little hole that all the radiation goes out of, and all of the radiation ionizes and vaporizes a catalyst, more or less, and just shoots out essentially
it's like how an RPG works, but with a nuke.
Yeah, it's a nuclear shaped charge.
Which you'll love to see.
Yeah. So a cyclonic torpedo is, as far as I can tell, it's a tandem warhead version of that.
And the result of that, it doesn't, because I know that they don't crack the planet. They normally glass it, or they make it otherwise uninhabitable.
No, they crack. Cyclonic torpedoes will blow a planet apart.
And there's different flavors of cyclonic too, apparently, because apparently the atmospheric incinerator torpedo is categorized as a cyclonic for some reason.
Oh yeah.
All right.
But basically, what the cyclonic torpedo does is the initial charge blows a hole through the crust. Then the rest of the torpedo goes in and then blows up the core.
Oh dear God.
And it's not always a case if they want to make the planet uninhabitable either, because the other horrific exterminatus, aside from simply just lancing the planet into oblivion, which is technically an option, is the virus bomb.
Yes.
Yeah. So the way that works is they'll drop the virus bomb, and then the virus bomb will convert everything into various flammable gases and juices. And yes, juices is very much a good descriptor, like a biological flammable sludge. And then they'll,
there's another weapon, and it's a weapon I believe that was last used during the Horus Heresy by Horus. It wasn't a virus bomb. It was like Promethium on steroids.
Well, let me continue. They will then launch a torpedo, typically Melta, to ignite all of the flammable gases and juices on the planet.
What is the name of that?
Yeah, but
I'm sorry. I'm trying to find the name of the. I distinctly remember this being a thing.
Phosphex,
it might be that.
Essentially like 40k white phosphorus, but not.
Are you thinking of Istvan 3 Exterminatus?
Literally, the planet is still on fire now.
Oh.
Yeah, I distinctly remember this being a thing, and it was some horrible monstrosity of a weapon that I believe it was Horus used. And he literally just went, nope, and the planet is still on fire. It's God. I
believe it was the other Istvan.
I think that
not the one that got virus bombed.
Because 3 was still was just dead.
I'll see if I can find it later, and we can put like a little note in here of it.
Yeah.
Just had a bunch of people.
So
I don't think it was magma bombs.
Yeah. Honestly, it kind of sounds like they just dumped a massive amount of like phosphex or some shit on the planet.
You might have.
On Istvan 3 they used virus bombs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not fire bombs.
Yeah. There are other ways of doing exterminatus, though these aren't technically naval, but since we're on the topic, might as well. During the conquest of the world of Loki, Lord Commander
favorite one.
Solar...
This is my favorite one.
Yeah. Lord Commander Solar Macarius ordered the destruction of the entire world. Macarius instructed the tech priests to change the orbit of Loki's moon, which is achieved by using huge machines placed on the surface that employed massive plasma drives to reposition the moon into the correct orbital path.
The Imperium is so massive that they literally threw a fucking moon at a fucking planet to get rid of it.
Yes.
Proves my point, and I believe I said this in the orc episode. There's very little difference between the humans and the orcs, because that's an orc strategy. It's there's a big rock in the sky. Why don't we just drop it?
There's actually an RTS I really like playing, Planetary Annihilation Titans, where one of the super weapons is like a Haley 5 rocket that you just build onto a moon or some shit, and it just launches it at whatever other planet is in the system. Some Imperial Navy and Adeptus Astartes fleets have used strategic nuclear weapons in the megaton range during an exterminatus action.
There's your answer. They do use nukes, just only for planetary extermination.
Yeah, because
Okay.
most of the actual blast wave of a nuke comes from the the radiation ionizing and fucking catastrophically heating the atmosphere and then causing the force wave. In space, a nuke unleashes a bunch of radiation that impacts on say matter, and then ionizes and superheats that matter into plasma.
I mean, a contact hit from a nuke on a ship that doesn't have void shields up would probably cause a problem. But with the existing void shields, I don't know if the energy release would be sufficient to overcome the shield.
And even then, on the outer hull of, say, even a cruiser or frigate, ionizing the outer layer of the super heavy armor isn't probably going to do much.
Yeah.
The result of...
Okay, it was the Phosphex bombs. I just found it. It was the Mortalis atmospheric missile.
Damn.
Literally burned the entire planet, and I believe the planet is still burning.
Damn.
Because it says it cannot be extinguished, period, except for exposure to vacuum.
Oh boy. Eventually the atmosphere will burn off.
Because Loken was still there.
Yeah. To expound upon the nuclear thing, the result of the impact was not total planetary destruction, but ended up causing massive shock waves across the planet, which resulted in massive earthquakes and waves of lava to spill out of the planetary crust. In the end, the only people who survived the destruction were heretics held up by massive fortresses. And then recently, during the 13th Black Crusade, Creed and the planetary governor of Cadia... it was Creed. Ordered a massive nuclear fusion plasma reactor...
oh dear.
Generatorium, in parentheses, on the prison world of St. Josmane's Hope in the Cadia system could be overloaded when it seemed the forces of chaos would finally take the world. Rather than a colossal meltdown, the reactor exploded with furious energy and blew the entire planet apart with the force of its blast. Yeah.
Oh, and I was wrong. I was also wrong about the Phosphex. I was wrong. It wasn't Horus that used it. It was the Ultramarines.
Ah, yes, that makes sense.
Gilman used 24 of them.
Yeah, there's atmospheric incinerator torpedoes. What do those do?
It's basically a year-old Trinity test when what's his name was.
Oh yeah,
you guys were going to light your atmosphere on fire when you set off the nuke.
A variant of the cyclonic torpedo, deployed from space into low planetary orbit. It will ignite a runaway thermonuclear chain reaction within the atmosphere of the target world that will rapidly consume all free oxygen initiating a planetary inferno that will burn the entire biosphere to ash.
Yeah, that's horrifying. I bet you, actually, now, I'm wondering if these sort of weapons are what they used to deny, like if I were to use the Phosphex or anything, it would be to deny planets to the Tyranids.
Well,
'Cause it burns
actually, they
everything.
used virus bombs on Tyranids. Because
Really?
as advanced as their, like, supposed immune system is, they have yet to adapt to virus bomb, to, like, the
I would
Death
not
Eater
want to
virus.
risk that.
Or is it the Life Eater virus or something? But yeah, no. They
Interesting.
basically wait till the hive ships are in low orbit, and then they drop it, and everything gets turned into sludge. And then they burn it,
Yeah,
because it's all
because
flammable.
you have to.
So I think the
I'm-
only reason they haven't adapted to it is because nothing survived exposure to it.
That's what the burning is for.
Yeah.
So I think that's all of the arms, including the Exterminatus. The idea that, actually, with Exterminatus, what class of ship has the capability to perform an Exterminatus strike?
Anything that can load torpedoes, I imagine.
And anything with a lance, really, depending on how long
Yeah.
you want the Exterminatus to take.
Oh my goodness!
it
So that's a
can-
lot of ships.
Yeah, it
A
can
lot
be,
of the ships you can do
well,
that.
The thing is, it can either be a single ship action, in which case it could be like a destroyer. Yeah.
Hmm.
Or it could be an entire fleet action, like you said, to burn the fucking planet.
That's
Doom lasers.
gunboat diplomacy to levels that I never would have imagined.
Yeah.
Imagine, I just imagine Imperial. This has probably happened more than once. A scene of just some Imperial naval officer coming down and being like, "Hey, I need people. Come along." And the uncivilized humans go, "No," and then a continent ceases to exist.
No, they'd invade the planet and take it over.
No,
One sec.
A
Dawn
little
of
bit less
War
than-
2 actually has a pretty good... Yeah, there it is. Dawn of War 2 Retribution. I will put it in Conclave Chambers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty good depiction of, like, orbital bombardment exterminatus.
interesting. And I think actually Exterminatus is a great place to pivot to the next thing, which is, I mean, what is Exterminatus to the person on the ground except for hell?
Yeah, hell is basically anything warp related in concerts to the Imperial Navy. Warp travel, communications, navigation.
It's their means of FTL.
Yeah. So basically, like we said earlier, they use their Geller fields to project reality around themselves, and then they have the navigator basically stare out of the only open window during a warp travel. So, like, their rooms are actually insulated against the warp for that shit.
So, what? Speaking of Gellerfields, we talked about Gellerfields more than once.
Yeah.
What would be a good way to break down and describe? Is there like a very good, concise lore description of what a Gellerfield? I know we kind of alluded to it being projecting a pocket of reality.
I don't think there's any explanation of how it works, because no one in the universe, save for specific characters, knows how it works, and none of them have explained it. In a book, at least.
Okay.
It's basically, I mean, it's basically equivalent to a void shield in weapons. The Gellerfield not only keeps reality around the ship, but that keeps all the evil things, bad things on the outside out. Because the demons can't cross over from Hellverse to Normalverse on any time they want, and that's applicable both in terms of like currently sitting on your planet, and in terms of sitting on a ship in a Gellerfield in the warp.
Yeah.
Has
There
the,
are
has the
some
Gellerfield ever
things-
been weaponized in that way? Then
Could
could you, for example, use a Gellerfield to crush a demon?
It wouldn't
If
surprise
a demon
me.
manifested in reality, could you be like, no?
I know.
well,
I know the chapter monastery for the Grey Knights, which was Titan, like the moon of Titan in our solar
Yes.
system. was submerged into the warp with like massive Geller fields and I'm assuming a warp drive. But yeah, there have been times like in the Gaunt's Ghost series where a saboteur essentially like tampered with the warp drive to send out a signal to a chaos fleet. It like pulsed and vibrated in such a way that it was noticeable in the warp, sort of like a beacon.
It was playing dubstep.
Kinda, yeah. What else?
You guys
I'm
remember
just more
Event
wondering.
Horizon?
So, I'm guessing that the Geller field is kind of like the Void Shields, where you can't put it in something small scale. Because I know the Void Shields they don't scale down very well.
No, yeah.
Because
You-
my
you
first thought
couldn't-
was put that on a weapon and hit a demon with it and see what happens.
That's basically the entire like design ethos of force weapons. Only instead of hitting them with reality, you're hitting them with psyker shit. Because despite being warp based, psychers are very good weapons against demons.
Well, it's sort of the concept of when you see it, it sees you. When you touch it, it can touch you. The problem
above,
goes
so
both
below.
ways. As above, so below. Exactly.
You couldn't put a Geller field on, say, like an individual craft, but there are like warp craft that are essentially just like Coast Guard gun cutters,
Couriers.
stuff like that do have Geller fields and warp drives. Speaking of, Geller fields do not help with propulsion through the warp. They only defend you from the warp.
Yep.
Okay.
It is the warp
Oddly
drive.
enough, Yeah, it's just the warp drive just gets you into the warp, right? And then you're using your plasma drives inside the warp.
That's interesting.
I think.
So that's.
right.
I'm not sure.
Let me
Because
see.
I don't think it's not really like detailed in anything I've seen. But
Bulky devices.
Actually, in Gaunt's Ghosts, they explain this, and that they all, after having spent so long on ships throughout the years, they have this inane sense of feeling the ship kind of power up again when it's ready to exit warp space, which implies that they don't use their main engines while they're sailing the warp.
Okay.
yeah, that
Interesting.
makes sense.
Oh no, hold on, here we go. Once within warp space, a warp-capable void ship may move by means of its main reaction drives, following powerful eddies and currents in the warp, eventually reaching a point in the Empyrean corresponding to its destination in real space.
So it's a combination of the warp is essentially an ocean, and you're riding the currents.
Yeah, kind of like
That's
the
super
Babylon 5
interesting.
hyperspace concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, very Star Sector vibe.
Another thing is
Maybe what they feel powering up is the warp drive powering up to kick them back out of the warp.
Yeah,
That would make sense.
that would make sense too. Navigators.
Describe it as just before feeling that weird drop in your stomach shift as they drop out.
Yeah,
Mm.
navigators, which are pretty much unique to the Imperium. They help you navigate through, the lighthouse that is the Astronomicon.
As we mentioned, yes.
They are plugged into the ship to help guide the ship. I don't know if they control the ship, or if they're plugged in to give like guidance to, like, say, a navigation officer or the con or whatever. But yeah.
And the warp itself is a particularly weirdly non-Euclidean, non-Newtonian, non what you think of as physical space environment. So moving 5 feet in the warp can move you 50 light years
Yes.
in real space, which is how they employ it for faster than light travel.
The best way I like to describe the warp is having 2 rules. Rule 1, your emotions can change it. Rule 2, there are no other rules.
Yeah, and it's super interesting because the idea of that space, I would love to do a whole thing on just the warp because and how
actually,
it
the first
lines up.
episode of this series was on the warp, but
Oh, it was? Oh, I missed it. Damn.
yeah,
I'll have to watch that.
yeah,
Because the warp is super interesting because there's a lot of parallels between a lot of other fictional settings
Oh, yeah.
having similar things, but it's got a lot of unique flavor.
yeah. Other than Event Horizon, which I haven't seen it, but as far as I can tell, and from our guest's own video on it, it might be a precursor to 40K. 40K is pretty much the only universe where FTL, like the alternate dimension that you inevitably go into to escape the laws of reality for FTL, is described as literally hell.
And it's very cool that it is inherently inimical, I believe the word is, to life.
I feel like there's...
makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like there's also something else we should touch on, which is how other species go through the warp.
Also, before you get there, this is actually where I give 40K some degree of credit for their creativity. The warp allows for the concept of FTL without fucking about with relativity.
Yeah.
And I know that the Tau, I believe, get really close to fucking about with relativity, but they don't quite do it. And this, I mean, aside from the warp presents some really causal problems, because if you get to your destination before you left, basically you're fucking about with time, and that's a frequent thing that happens. But it at least doesn't try to do hand wavering with like.
I think the inconsistency of the warp prevents issues like that, specifically because
it can't be reliably done. It's not repeatable.
Like you couldn't like reliably jump to one place like 3 years before you left and then jump back to that place.
It almost makes me wonder if there's a balancing act there. Like if there's things that are offsetting the causality.
You're putting way too much credit into the
I know
reliability of
Remember,
the warp.
I'm the person who thinks like that. I'm like, I wonder if there's a math equation somewhere in here.
There is no equation. The only equation is chaos.
Because I know that
try telling Zinch that again.
The Tau don't use they kind of push down into the warp and then bounce.
Yeah, like you know how you take like a floaty or something and push it down under the water, and then you let it up at an angle and it just skip away.
And it goes flying. Yeah,
that's exactly how the Tau do it, but they do it in short bursts. So, like, they have to repeatedly skim the warp to get to where they're going. It's slow. Like, it's, like, infinitesimally... However the fuck you say that word. It's infinitely slower, but it's infinitely safer. And then you get to the Eldar, who say, fuck the warp, and then just bore a hole between the warp and reality, and then just use that.
Don't they have the webway?
Yeah, that's exactly what the webway is. It's sort of a subdimension within the warp of just tunnels.
Everybody complaining about 40K not having Skaven, just never read any Eldar lore.
Okay, the Skaven would not be the Skaven in 40K because the Skaven could never outnumber humanity in 40K.
No, I love how perfect and sensible your statement was, and I hate that because it makes perfect sense.
Anyway, then you get into the orcs, which they do it similar to how the Imperials do it, which is projecting a field of whatever around themselves.
It's just them screaming, though.
Yeah, it's instead of reality, it's WOG energy. Which is, so, a Geller field is like trying to sneak through a bar without drawing much attention to yourself. The way the orcs do it, which there is no technical term for it, because just the way the orcs travel through the warp is, Imagine a man the size of a polar bear standing on 2 legs that is extremely hairy and very smelly, raising a chair above his head, and then running
It's called
screaming
crumping.
through the crowded bar.
Running,
Yes.
screaming naked through the crowded bar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just
Or-
imagine Judge Holden from Blood Meridian.
Orcs crump through warp space. That's what they do.
Well, given that they project WOG energy into the warp to like keep their ship normal, I just call it a warp WOG.
Yeah, and it's genuinely funny because they love it when demons pop in. They
Yeah,
consider it
I was about to get into
entertainment. I love that.
I don't really think there's much else in terms
For
of
Hell,
like actual travel for Hell. However, there is one little extra tidbit I want to get into, and that is the consequences of Exterminatus on the warp.
Ooh,
When a
Oh,
planet
yes.
dies like that, there is a scream in the warp. And as often as they can, the Imperium will have specialized Mechanicus ships in near proximity to this planet to harness that death scream and turn it into artillery shells. It's
is this the shells that you mentioned before? The ones that are?
that scream at you, yes.
Oh no!
I think it's
not Whatnot.
I think it's like a Quake cannon
Yeah.
on it's a modified Bane blade. Or not, it's a modified Shadow Sword, which is basically a tank like a casemate tank destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of shooting like a giant laser or even conventional munitions, it shoots the death scream of a planet at your foe, and it creates a giant fucking earthquake blast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
each quake cannon shoots a fragment of a planet that's been subject to Exterminatus.
Oh,
Yep.
hell, man.
Holy balls!
It is Titan grade weapon. I would also like to expand upon that.
Yeah, they are. That's oh boy, that's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. I think that about covers it, unless anyone else has anything.
I've been listening 99% of the time because I know
Wow, this is
nothing
just
about
fun,
this.
man.
That's why I've been asking all these silly questions. Is because I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
from an outside perspective, this is insane.
Mm-hmm.
I want to underline that the scale on its own. Like, I had to take a minute and like let that soak in of how big this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The torpedo is 300 meters long. What?
And, you know, the cruiser is 5 clicks long, which in Star Wars is comparable to a Super Star Destroyer.
Yeah, and that's just a cruiser.
Mm-hmm.
Ay.
That's not even getting into Gloriana or Emperor class battleships, which are
Which are
The size of the state.
multiple. Yeah, it's dozens of kilometers long.
I am
They
astounded.
have
I'm astounded
highways
at the scale.
inside of them.
They have train systems.
Yeah.
I will say this, and I've said this a million times. I think is that a lot of sci-fi series don't get scale correct, where they kind of hand wave it, or it's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's a billion people here, that's so many people, and it's like, not really.
Mm-mm.
Whereas in 40K, it's like, no, yeah, this is the scale. It feels correct or close enough that I'm like, oh no,
Or you get
oh
into
geez,
like Mass Effect, where you're on a quote unquote civilized planet, but it's like a few dozen people around you.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this is a
Yeah,
hyper.
They,
This is a hyper developed advanced world, and it's like a few million people.
they do a very good job in the books of tailoring the scale to the story so
Yeah.
that it's not overwhelming the whole.
Yeah.
way
And-
throughout, because like if you're writing from the guard's perspective, what part of the ship needs to be handled? Okay, well, where they're staying while they're on the ship, and then where their entourage stays while they're on the ship.
Mhm.
The rest of the ship can stay vague.
Yep.
But you better make sure you flesh
good.
that out, and that's going to be the size of a city.
Yep.
Unless you think just the ships are large, don't forget that the Imperium maintains an entire, I guess, fleet of star forts, the smallest of which is about 22 kilometers square.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And bear in mind that damn thing is warp capable. They're shoving something the size of Manhattan through the warp.
The phalanx of Imperial Fist's fame.
We're gonna have you back just for a thing on that, because that what
Yeah.
that makes me wonder how big the Black Star Fortress is. Oh no.
Blackstone fortresses. Yeah.
There's a reason it was able to explode a planet.
Yeah.
Oh my god. It has its own gravity field.
Yeah. Well, so I mentioned this earlier. These ships, even like the smaller cruisers, are running into the Roche limit in planets. So there's got to be something holding them together. And just for clarification, the Roche limit is basically how close a large object can get to something much, much bigger than it before it gets torn apart.
Mhm.
It becomes egg-shaped.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
As soon as you mentioned the Roche limit, I was like, "Oh God, you're right." I got really quiet for a
And
little
that's
bit
why,
there.
like, from what I remember, the solution to that typically is that the naval yards where they stay are usually stationed on orbital plates surrounding
or
You would never
gas giants, because
Well,
it
no,
would
or
help
you-
with dealing with that mass. Orbital plates, like I had mentioned earlier, you said you know what they were,
Yeah.
Johan, is like, think like the Dyson sphere around the sun, like,
oh God.
or
When it's around
the
a planet.
on Calth, the factoriums that were in orbit over top of it they're just these massive, basically like Australia-sized plates that orbit the planet, like satellites.
Or you pull a Mechanicus, or whatever the predecessor to the Mechanicus was before Old Knight, and you make a giant ring around the planet,
Ring worlds.
and
That's what they
that's
did.
how you make
Nope.
spaceships.
Cool.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, with enough active support, you can make anything.
Actually, the Mechanicus has an entirely hollowed out planet.
But
That's a
I
Forge
want
world.
to kind of take a second to invert that elevator pitch that
Yeah.
was at the beginning of it. And my entire thought process throughout this entire thing was, oh, they're big. Oh no, they're big. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my elevator pitch on this is, these are not merely cathedrals; these are Vaticans
Yes.
in space, shooting
Vatican's
buildings
in
at each
space, each other broadsides. Yeah.